Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Lucas. We're here this afternoon to discuss the legacy of our friend Charles Rochester Gatson. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Susan Wilson, the Vice Chancellor of Diversity and Inclusion at UMKC. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ricardo.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. We're here to talk about our friend Chuck and some of the things that he's done in the legacy of development here in Kansas City. And want to talk about your first recollections of meeting Chuck, and I'll give you some of mine. But tell me, how'd you meet Chuck?
So in 1997, I joined Swope Health Services, and my role was I ran the Community Mental Health Center there, and of course Chuck and I were on the same leadership team. He was running Community Builders, which was kind of an urban development organization. And so I met him in our leadership meeting, and we said, let's go out and get to know each other and have a drink. Well, we became fast buddies. Now, if he were here, he would say that I had him rolling on the floor because, you know, I'm from urban Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was telling him my story, and he was on the floor laughing. I don't know what was so funny, but I guess I can be comical. And we became fast friends, and I think the thing that brought us together is we both were from an urban area, and a lot of people didn't know because Chuck could be very down to earth, but he also was supremely intellectual. He was well read, and so those two things I think brought us together. We had a lot of common experiences, and we became fast friends right after that.
And I think that's what people misread about you. They look at you and think you as bougie, and the same thing with Chuck. But if they sit down and talk to you, his sense of humor was on the ground. And that was one of the things I liked about Chuck when I met him. But the thing that drew me to him most was his acumen for development and the acumen for moving development projects in our community. And some of the progressive thinking that he had. He was one of the community development organizations that had a component of community outreach. He had a wing that was specifically funded that he used to have to put on his back to help get the funding for this community component of his organization. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Chuck's intent always was to make the community a better place, and he did that through development. But what I really liked was he wasn't one of these developers that came in and told the community what they should have. He would involve the community. He did community organizing. He held town halls or opportunities for citizens to say what they wanted in their community. And I think he wanted to make the community a better place. The other thing that really stood out about Chuck is he was a convener of people. His Thursday night happy hours at Jardines at the time, they were legendary. You could go there, you could see a mayor, state representatives, architects, other developers, people from City Hall. It was a who's who. And it was all about deal making. It wasn't just for having some drinks and kicking back and laughing and telling jokes and stories, which happened a lot too. But it was also about connecting people, getting projects and deals done by using social capital. And myself, I met so many people just going to Chuck's Thursday happy hours. He was a very generous man. So he would help anybody that needed help that he liked, and maybe some that he didn't like. And he would celebrate people's birthdays. You know, he threw me a birthday party at Jardines, because Chuck was somebody that was a true friend and authentic, and he cared about people deeply.
Thank you. I found Chuck to be striking as an intellectual, particularly when it came to being able to reach out. Just like you said, at those meetings, my propensity would be to, when I learned this development conversation, I would come in the door and pour gasoline on the fire. Chuck's was a different approach. His approach was water, sand, conversation. He had a different approach to it. He showed me a different approach to the conversation. Even though the frustration that we were feeling on this side of town, in the conversation of development, he was showing us how to methodically work through the conversation. And a lot of times we didn't have someone on this side of town trying to show us how to methodically work through the process. Some of the things that he put His legacy includes Swope Health, some of the things he did there. It was his direct work in development that helped put the resources and the pieces in place, notwithstanding a lot of other people on that process, but Chuck was the person that guided that conversation.
Well, and I think the other thing that people forget about Chuck is that he developed other young professionals in the art of development. Because development is one of those things, even though I'm not a development professional, I can see that development is a recipe where the parts need to come together and harmonize, or things can go wrong. And he was very instrumental in teaching people new to the development game how to play the game, how to get things done. And I know a lot of people really benefited from that because he wasn't afraid to share his knowledge.
And when you say share knowledge, he was one of the people that sent me to get trained around the country. At the National Development Council, he was insistent when I came from ad hoc group against crime, move up with small knowledge of development. He put me in a room with people who actually knew it and made me learn it, put the books in front of me. You had to go pass tests to get certified. He didn't want you around if you didn't know how to have a conversation about development on his team. He had different components. Like I said, the community social side of his organization, they had an interest in development, but he didn't send them to get trained in development. The people that he thought would be beneficial in it, he sent them to be trained. And I was one of those. And I found it to be beneficial, and I'm thankful to him for that. But I'm not the only guy. There's a lot of other people, Mr. Wallace, Mr. Burton. There's a lot of people in the industry that this guy had an influence on. And as you being one of his friends, Dr. Wilson, were you ever make one of those winery trips to San Francisco with Chuck?
Unfortunately, that's one of my biggest regrets.
Yeah.
I never made it, and partly because it seemed like every time it was happening, I had something that I couldn't get out of. But I heard they were legendary. However, I did share a lot of other time with Chuck and with his wife Alice, because he was an excellent cook. A lot of people don't know that he was an excellent cook, and he would have little dinner parties at his house. And again, the conversation was always stimulating. It was funny because he could be hilarious, and then the two of us together could be really funny because we just had that synergy.
Right.
But I think part of what he really believed in is, number one, there weren't enough African American people in development, and therefore in many cities other people were making decisions about African American communities other than the people in those communities. And I think that really drove a lot of his passion, whether it was projects for low to moderate income housing, which he did, or helping develop that the grocery store and the surrounding area. Whatever it was the idea that we want our community to thrive and be great too, just like other communities. And I think he really encouraged investors that the central city is a place that people should invest. A lot of times people don't invest in the inner city, and they have all kinds of misconceptions. And I know Chuck was always one to really talk about some of the misconceptions, like if you invest in the inner city that you won't, get your money back, or it's just a waste of time. And I think he was one that always worked to disabuse people of those kind of notions.
And I can appreciate you pointing it out. Me myself, my last thoughts of Chuck, I couldn't understand some of the teams that he would put together. But then once I learned the landscape, he really didn't have a choice. If you looked at who was invested in our community, they were looking at the rate of return on their investment. They were looking at all the risk factors that were involved. It was a hard task to bring some of the players to the table that he brought to the table to take an interest in developing on this side of truth. So I appreciate him for that. And I appreciate you for your time.
Well, and I would just say lastly that Chuck Gatson was a great friend, a great developer, a lover of Central City, and really wanted the best for the communities that we live in.
Talking about our friend, Charles Rochester Gatson.
would like to tell our audience? Well, it was a pleasure having you on the show. In closing, people, as I always say, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good night.